You've got to get up pretty early in the morning to speak to America's hardworking farmers and food producers. We should know. FLM Harvest is a strategic, full-service creative consultancy proud to reach more farmers, farmer boards, and food and commodity associations than any agency in the country. And we understand omni-channel as well as we understand the journey from field to fork. Most importantly, we connect clients to the audiences that matter to them.
Thank you for joining us for our Agri-Pulse Washington Week in Review. I'm Spencer Chase, joined as always by Agri-Pulse Executive Editor Phil Brasher, discussing the week that was, agriculturally speaking, in Washington, D.C. And in Washington, D.C. this week, we have a word we rarely get to use in earnest. Usually when we do, it's sarcastically. They're reporting progress on U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement negotiations. The House Democratic Working Group meeting with the Trump administration and U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer specifically telling us that they're making progress on the ongoing trade talks with the hope of eventually bringing that agreement to the House floor for a vote. And Phil, you know, I make a little bit of a joke and speak in jest there about the word progress, but in all reality, what does the movement that we saw this week between House Democrats and the Trump administration mean for the long term of the agreement?
Well, the chairman of the committee, Richard Neal, came out, talked to reporters after this meeting with Lighthizer that was on Wednesday. And he certainly seemed upbeat, said that they had made their way through some issues. He thought they would only need a few more meetings. I think that was probably the most important takeaway from that. That and the fact that they had made some progress on some important issues. He didn't clarify or didn't go into detail about what those were, but definitely got the sense that things are moving along. Of course, we have a short timetable, getting shorter by the day between here and the end of the year. The House will be, they will be in session next week, and then they will be out a week, and then we're staring Thanksgiving in the face.
Mm-hmm. And you know, it's interesting to note that Chairman Neal's comments to reporters happened not at the exact same time, but pretty close to the same time that a number of Senate Republicans were going to the floor and calling on House Democrats to make progress and take up the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement. And that when they were informed of those words shortly thereafter, a lot of relief in their eyes on that. But,
there's one sort of rule of thumb I've noticed about Congress. The more members talk about something needs to happen, oftentimes that means you're getting close to it happening. It's amazing how many letters come from Capitol Hill to government agencies just right before something comes out of the government agency that these lawmakers want to happen.
What do you know? Their timing is just always
could be. I don't know that that's necessarily the case here. It's clearly the Republicans, the Senate Republicans, want to put pressure on the House Democrats, and of course, this is all about 2020 and trying to position the parties, put them in the best position, each party in the best position in rural and farm states.
Mm-hmm. And for a deeper dive into some of the particulars about the negotiations, I'd encourage you to stop by agripulse.com. Bill Thompson's got some coverage up on that. He's been following this issue very closely for us. But want to shift into a different subject here. Phil, you mentioned the tight time frame that lawmakers have. It is now less than 1 month until the government runs out of funding. That agreement that was reached earlier this year to fund the government through November 21st. November 21st is now rapidly approaching. And Phil, we saw the Senate take some action on a number of appropriations bills, but where does that leave the broader government funding picture at this point?
Well, the Senate has on the floor, they hope to pass it next week, a package of 4 bills that includes the agriculture bill, which would fund USDA and FDA, the Interior Environment bill, which funds the Interior Department and EPA. Those are both 2 bills that are very important to agriculture. They need to get those out of the Senate so that they can then start negotiations with the House on final spending requirements and levels for fiscal 2020, which, oh, by the way, started October 1st. So there's still a lot of work to be done. Talking to the chairman of the Senate Appropriations Committee, Richard Shelby, he's saying he expects that they're going to need to go into the first of next year before they can get all these bills passed. That's actually what's happened in recent years. They've had a very difficult time even getting it done in December. So we're on that track, and of course, we hear the House has been a little preoccupied with an impeachment question, and that's only going to continue in the next week. So a lot of distractions on Capitol Hill. So we're likely looking at next year until we get this finally settled.
And it's not uncommon for government funding to be kind of backed up against a number of other important things, year-end deadlines, things like this. But I mean, it's also important to note that, I mean, not to lessen other years' issues, but this year we're talking about, the renegotiation of a very major trade agreement and also the potential impeachment of a president of the United States. These are not small matters the government funding is up against right now. It's a couple of monumental things making their way or not making their way across Capitol Hill right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's gotten hard. You got a divided Congress that makes it difficult. So there's no appetite for a shutdown. I think what you'll see is just another continuing resolution in November, potentially keeping the government open until into January or February, so that setting essentially a new deadline for getting these spending bills passed into law.
So I want to wrap up this week with a discussion of one of probably the longest running issues of my tenure here with Agri-Pulse, the long running renewable fuel standard debate, and the debate over the use of small refinery exemptions saw not necessarily firm government action, but some additional comments to just kind of bring to your awareness here this week. At the beginning of the week, the Trump administration had a cabinet meeting where President Donald Trump was speaking with Andrew Wheeler, kind of in full public view. A lot of reporters in the room said that he was working on small refineries, making sure they had everything they need. He repeated similar comments at a speech in Pittsburgh on Wednesday. And also in that cabinet meeting, Ag Secretary Sonny Perdue offering up the thoughts that the nation's farmers and ranchers would be a little bit more understanding of the SRE deal that they have so far been speaking against once they developed a broader understanding of it. And those remarks, to say they have not been received well would be one way to put it. A lot of folks very frustrated with the fact that the administration not necessarily hearing the arguments of the biofuels community, it would appear.
Yeah, this is potentially a really tough political issue for Republicans going into next year. You've got, on one hand, you've got the trade war with China continuing. We'll see how that if this phase one deal develops and these $40 to $50 billion in purchases that the president is promising materialize. But this is just issue, Spencer, has just not gone away, and they don't seem to have figured out a way out of this yet.
Well, and it's also important to note the deal is currently open for public comment, but President Trump also said at that meeting the deal is pretty much wrapped up. We're just waiting to sign it. A lot of folks on Capitol Hill would request that not necessarily be the case. There's a public hearing on the subject in the world famous Ypsilanti, Michigan next week. Hopefully, a lot of folks are hoping that their opinions will be heard in that matter, but also hoping that those public comments might lead to some change in this proposal. Whether or not that happens, obviously remains to be seen. Anyone with a time machine, please let me know. But this is something, as Phil mentioned, it's been a lingering issue. It's a very sensitive political issue for a lot of folks, and it is an even-numbered year divisible by 4 next year, and that fact certainly looms large over this debate as well. But I think that's going to do it for this week. A lot of things going on this week, including a lot of things going on this weekend. I am wearing the blue of my beloved Jackrabbits. Phil, for reasons that are absolutely beyond me, is wearing a green tie today, something I find particularly offensive given the Jackrabbits opponent, but I won't let that get in the way of our professional working relationship. But I think that's going to do it for this week. For Phil Brasher, I'm Spencer Chase. Have a good one.